For the first time since 1910, when the British women were not yet allowed to vote, the British voters were summoned to the national polls on October the 10th, 1974. Like for the first time since 1910, had there been two general elections of parliamentary elections in the single year. The obvious reason for Prime Minister Wilson to call these early elections was to help the Labour Party gain a working majority in the 635-seat House of Commons. He narrowly succeeded in winning a majority, but it was hardly a working majority. As a conservative politician and writer Ian Gilmore gloomily, perhaps cynically, observed in his book Whatever Happened to the Tories, Prime Minister Wilson had, as the leader of a minority Labour Party government, to appear as moderate and businesslike as possible, which of course meant ditching or abandoning virtually his entire election manifesto or program, while the opposition leader and defeated Prime Minister Edward Heath had to keep the government on guard and tried to keep it off balance politically, but not to precipitate or cause a too early snap general election. So Wilson's gamble narrowly paid off in terms of the majority, but it hardly was a working majority, because it only was a 3-seat majority. The turnout was down sharply to 72.8%, probably because of voter fatigue or disillusionment or cynicism. The Labour Party, with 39.2% of the vote, or 11,457,000 votes, managed to get 319 members. The Conservatives slid down to 35.8% of the vote and 277 members. The Liberals suffered a slight decline to 18.3% of the vote and 13 members. Jeremy Thorpe was still their leader, and William Woolf of the Scottish National Party led his party to 2.9% share of the popular vote and 11 seats. He himself, however, was defeated in West Lothian. As we know, Harold Wilson then oversaw the referendum on whether Britain should remain a member of the European Economic Community in June 1975, where some 67% of the participating British voters approved their country's continuing membership in the European Economic Community. At the end of July and at the start of August 1975, Prime Minister Wilson was in Helsinki, Finland, for the signing of the Conference on Cooperation and Security in Europe, that conference's final act, which, for example, promised to respect the European boundaries of that time while allowing the possibility of peaceful change. The NATO and Warsaw Pact countries promised to inform each other in advance if within 250 kilometers or less of their boundaries there would be military exercises, and the signatories promised to respect human rights, a provision that remained largely a dead letter until the perestroika reforms of the Soviet Union that started in 1985. In March 1976, Prime Minister Wilson abruptly announced his retirement. He was turning 60 that spring, and James Callaghan, who was an experienced Labour politician, having served in the House of Commons since 1945, just like Wilson, and had occupied 3 major ministerial portfolios before that of the Prime Minister. He had served as Home Secretary, as Foreign Secretary, and as Chancellor of the Exchequer. He became the new Prime Minister, but then there was that winter of discontent from November 1978 to February 1979, with wave after wave of strikes, even of such humble employees as rubbish collectors, grave diggers, and funeral car drivers. And this then led the Conservatives to a solid victory in the next federal in the next general elections.